It's hard to believe that it's already been 6 years since Gatekeeper opened to the public. Before even being announced, many coaster enthusiasts were sad to see Disaster Transport getting torn down, but I think that feeling was short-lived once Gatekeeper was announced. In Cedar Point fashion, this wing coaster by B&M opened as the tallest, fastest, and longest wing coaster on the planet. My relationship with Gatekeeper has been a rocky one at best. It seems like every year that I visit the park, my opinion changes in how much I enjoy this roller coaster. If you've been following my channel for some time now, you'd see that this is my second review of Gatekeeper. My opinion has changed on Gatekeeper once again, so hopefully now I'm ready to tackle this elusive coaster and provide you with my complete, honest review. Presentation. Gatekeeper is the first roller coaster that guests will interact when you enter the park. This giant roller coaster towers over the park station as riders are sent through 2 inversions. This keyhole element is probably the most exciting part of Gatekeeper. It is also really cool to watch if you're standing below. This roller coaster really sets the mood for all guests visiting the park and lets you know that you are at America's roller coaster. The station is somewhat basic, but I wouldn't expect more as Cedar Point is an amusement park at heart. The area surrounding Gatekeeper is very well staged to show you off the roller coaster and the beach line. Gatekeeper is tucked in right along the beach, smacking right up against the parking lot while traveling over the park entrance. For what Gatekeeper is, I think the whole presentation is well done. Maybe some slight improvements could be done, like a tunnel at the bottom of the first inversion, just little things. I'm giving Gatekeeper a score of 9 for ride presentation. Ride intensity. I think one of the primary complaints that I've heard from fellow coaster nerds is that Gatekeeper isn't as intense as they would have hoped. I can somewhat agree on that statement. The first drop through the Immelman is where you'll experience the strongest G-forces. I have actually started to gray out a few times during the first inversion dive. Unfortunately, the rest of the ride isn't that intense, including the so-called airtime hill that takes place after the Immelman. Gatekeeper I don't think was intended to be a super intense experience. This ride is all about the open air feeling, close call collisions, and fun, smooth inversions. Every roller coaster at Cedar Point doesn't need to be ultra intense. I think Gatekeeper complements the other attractions in the park, and since this roller coaster has a high capacity, it's meant to be experienced multiple times. Your ride experience will change depending on what side of the train you are on, being in the front or the back of the train, and also if you are seated in an inner seat or an outer seat. So don't let your opinion of Gatekeeper ride on one go around. I'm giving Gatekeeper a score of 7 for ride intensity. Fun factor. Gatekeeper is an interactive roller coaster. It's one of those roller coasters that's so much fun to watch. Fortunately, the ride is also fun as well. Over the last few years since this roller coaster opened, my opinion seems to change every visit. Sometimes I think it's a boring ride, other times I really enjoy all the fun inversions, and there was that one time that Gatekeeper provided a nasty headache. Like many roller coasters, depending on what time of the day or the year you visit the park, the ride will be handling different. Gatekeeper really crawls in the morning. When I was watching it make a test run about 9 in the morning, I thought it wasn't going to complete the dive inversion. Later in the day, near closing time, I watched the coaster whip right through the inversion. If it's really windy out, it could affect how bad of a rattle you might experience. Everything comes into play with Gatekeeper, so make sure to give it a few times before laying down judgment. For those who enjoy some good hang time, sit up in the front. That first inversion is a blast as you rotate slowly before diving down to the earth. Also, I noticed that the front row has slightly more airtime during the airtime hill. So in other words, if you want to experience any airtime, you gotta ride up in the front. The keyhole elements are the standout elements of this ride. Who doesn't like a good near collision element? All in all, I think it was a little too harsh on this coaster my last time around, as I believe I gave Gatekeeper a score of 6 for the fun factor. Now I'm moving it up to an 8. Originality. I think the concept of a wing coaster might be a little flawed in some ways. The idea sounds great, being situated out on the side of the tracks instead of having it above or below you makes sense. Unfortunately, this wing concept is notorious for developing a rattle. If the weight load is improperly displaced, expect some rattle. This has been my primary complaint of Gatekeeper ever since it opened. This year I thought the rattle wasn't as bad as previous years, so I was able to enjoy the coaster more. However, this issue is somewhat common with many B&Ms solely because of how wide their trains are. Valraven is a very wide train and can develop a nasty rattle at times. The ride layout tends to be similar with other B&M roller coasters. The inverted dive drop seems to be a standard with all wing coasters. Honestly, I prefer the traditional drop like on Wild Eagle than the inverted dive drop, but it's still a fun element. I think B&M would benefit from trying some newer elements and try to mix things up a bit. B&M is known for their reliability, so they wouldn't want to wander too far off the beaten path, but I think their typical formula is definitely showing its age. However, an attraction like this isn't for your coaster enthusiasts, it's for the general audience. Just like dive coasters, the GP go nuts over this wing coaster concept. Overall, I think a score of 6 sounds about right. Ride smoothness. Every year I've ridden this roller coaster, I think this score would change, and this year I think the ride is a lot smoother than during my 2018 experience. Sure, it has a slight rattle that pops up, mostly during the first couple inversions, but once you make it through the Immelman, I thought the coaster was really smooth. If you're really susceptible to a coaster rattle, I recommend riding up near the front. It's a lot smoother experience. I'm giving Gatekeeper a score of 8 for ride smoothness. Alright, the final score comes to 7.6, which is a good score. Comparing this with my previous review of Gatekeeper, the score has improved by 1 point. I think Gatekeeper is a solid ride and fits in nicely with Cedar Point's lineup. I know the coaster nerds would have preferred a giant giga coaster that roared over the park entrance, but this makes more practical sense. A roller coaster can still be a decent ride even if it's not a giga. My biggest complaint with Gatekeeper is the rattle, and I thought it seemed to be better this year. Hopefully B&M is able to work out all of these issues with their wing coasters, because I think we could see larger, more intense wing coasters on the horizon. My personal score is going to be a 7.5. Still a decent score. Gatekeeper is by no means my favorite coaster at Cedar Point, but I can appreciate how well it complements the other attractions on the peninsula. The ride has a fantastic capacity, so the line usually moves through at a decent pace. Alright, well that's my second review of Gatekeeper. Let me know what you think of this wing coaster in the comments below. As always, please subscribe so you don't miss out on more great content coming your way by XscreamThrills.